subjects are covered tonight to ask Rabbi Naftali Haft to give the presentation.
Thank you, Rabbi Ryback, and thank you everyone for being here. I have a couple of objectives. I hope everybody is utilizing objectives every time you teach a class. Do you know the acronym SWABAT? Does anyone know what that stands for? SWBAT? SWABAT? Students will be able to. Perfect. Okay, so with every instructional lesson that you give, you should have that language top of mind. You can make it 12-bot. Talmidim will be able to, but you get the idea, right? So given a 2-hour, precisely 2-hour, or give a 3-hour presentation on memory and retention, in this case, you are not students, participants will be able to, and here you have the objectives on the screen. Okay? So whenever you give a shiur, a class, whatever it might be, you always want to ask yourself, with this shiur, what will my Talmidim be able to do in terms of knowledge and skills? What information will they take in? What will they be able to do? What will I ask them to do to demonstrate to me that they've learned it? Right? We want to be in the business of collecting evidence that the Talmidim have actually learned. It's a different topic, but you get the idea. If I have an objective, then I have a chance. If I don't have an objective, then anything goes. So we really want to make sure we know exactly what our Talmidim are here to accomplish. And that's really what the objective is all about. So we're going to focus on 12 retention strategies. And you have them in your packet. You had them on the slide before, no mysteries here. We're going to go into each of them as we continue, and how they can be applied to your classroom to help your students recall information. I'm just curious, have any of you ever had the experience where you taught something and you thought you taught it really, really well? And on top of it, you gave a test. And your Talmidim did very well with that test. And the scores were, let's say, class average of B or higher. And then a week or two later, you reference something, and it's complete clueless. Have you ever had that experience? Please shake your head up and down if you had, side to side if you haven't. I know the hour is late, and some of you look a little bit low on the caffeine, so I just want to make sure we're moving here. Okay? So I had that experience many times. I taught a Gemara shiur for a number of years, and other subjects as well, and oftentimes it would happen, I would teach something, they did really well, but then, afterwards it was as if I never taught it before. And by the way, that's a very empty feeling, right? We're working really hard. We're very creative people, we're passionate, we're excited, we love what we do, and we want it to stick. For us it typically does, we'll talk about that later because we teach it. When you teach something, you remember it. But when you're a passive learner, you forget it more rapidly. So we have to talk about how to ensure that retention is actually occurring. Okay? And then again, to identify specific applications for your classroom by building retention strategies into your lesson plans. Okay, so that leads me into the first question. Actually, we're going to get to that in a second, but this is how I'm going to measure success tonight. Can we list and briefly explain the 12 strategies? Right? When we're done, I should be able to ask you, and you should be able to tell me the 12, not by heart. You should be able to look at your paper and say, these are the 12 strategies, and this is what they mean. You should be able to have a conversation with the person next to you and discuss it. That would mean that I was successful tonight. And if you can't do that, that means that I failed in some way. All right? And the second point, sorry, I'm not used to having the screen so far off to the side. The second one is identify 4 applications for your classroom. That means I don't expect you to do all 12 on a day-to-day basis. But hopefully you should be able to find 4 that you could use. We also want to tell our Talmidim what we're here to accomplish and what we want them to do with it. You will learn, by the way, much, much better if you know what you're here to accomplish than if I just give you information and then ask you at the end to figure it out. Which is why I started with those slides before. That this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. I didn't tell you everything, but I told you quite a bit so far already. And this way, as you are taking in information, your brain has a place to put it. And you start to organize it in a way. It helps you be masader your thought processes. Okay? You want to engage them. Of course, you want to teach them. You want to check for understanding. You want to make sure that they're understanding it as you go. You give them opportunity for practice. All of these are really critical. But the one thing we often forget is building in strategies for retention. How do I teach it in a way that they will hold on to it for a longer period of time? How do we create, like we said, stickiness in our lessons? How do we make sure that the Talmidim won't forget it in a week or two because of information override? New information comes in, so the old information just gets overwritten, so to speak. That's why we typically don't remember every time we go to davening, for example. right? Today's tefillah overrides yesterday's, which overrides the days before, because our brain's not going to hold on to all of it, otherwise it'll be too much. So it selectively forgets a lot of things, and our Talmidim will do the same unless we help them hold on to identify the most important things, and help them to hold on to it in the very best way possible. Okay, so that's really, I think, a conversation we want to be thinking about, and this really speaks to the other point. Do we have expectations? Right? Do we have expectations? I don't know, for example, if your expectations that your Talmidim will remember information till the next test, or if you expect them to remember it a month from now, or 3 months from now, or 6 months from now. I don't know if you really think about it in that way. I don't know if I thought about it that way when I was teaching on a regular basis, but I think we should. I think we should be asking ourselves all the time, how can we make sure that what we're teaching today is held onto for as long as possible and as clearly as possible? Those are both important pieces. And by the way, the better you remember, the more clearly you remember, the longer you'll hold on to it and with greater accuracy. So retention actually matters a lot. And we don't think about it when we're teaching because we're focused on so many other things. But this, I think, will help tremendously. And if we give our Talmidim these skills, they will use it in your class. And even if the next year's Rebbe doesn't focus on it as much, I don't know who's here from which yeshiva and whatnot, but your impact will be significant because you're giving them tools for life. And if you tell them what you're doing, if you demystify, right? We oftentimes hold all the cards, and we do all the preparation. We don't necessarily tell our Talmidim how we got to where we are. How do we get clarity in this sugya? How do we understand Rashi's question? How do we understand all these various things? Sometimes we need to sort of take them behind the scenes and let them know our hachana, how we prepare for things, etc. Another thing we want to tell them is just good learning practices and good retention practices. So if they remember that, it'll help them all throughout their lives, because they'll have strategies that will help them. They won't just be good at remembering because they have a gift. They're good at remembering typically because they have a strategy. And we want to help them with those strategies. How do I remember all 12 of these strategies? They're random, they're different, they don't really fit. So I come up with one sentence. Car of GMAC, so I have an association because they have a car that runs on these races. So car of GMAC, vrooms. And if I have that, so I have OF, GMAC, VROUMS. Now I still have to remember what they all stand for, but now I have something to work with. Okay? So what does the O of stand for? Organizing. What does the F stand for? Funnel. Okay? What does GMAC stand for? Grouping. Mental glue. Active learning and clustering. Switching to this side for those of you still paying attention. Okay, vrooms. Visual memory. Read it with me, everybody. Recite it out loud. With enthusiasm. Overlearning. There we go. Understanding. Mnemonic devices and songs. Oftentimes you do a lot of talking. A lot of auditory. So the students who process best with their ears, they're in good shape. But the ones who need to see it, and the ones who need to see it in picture form, and the ones who need to move in order to properly internalize it, and the ones who need to discuss it, and the ones who need to think about it by themselves. By the way, just as a brief aside, you may be familiar with the term introvert and extrovert. Does that at all sound familiar to you? Introverts and extroverts? Okay, there's a big misconception about those two terms. Many people think that the extrovert is just the outward, the outgoing guy. Right? The guy who goes into a simcha and just talks and schmoozes with everybody, has a great conversation, and the introvert is hiding in the corner, Mr. Shy, doesn't like to speak. Do you have any introverts in your classroom? Do you have any kids in your room that tend to be quieter, may only have a handful of friends, don't necessarily like to be super public in a lot of what they do? Okay. They say that about 40% of our population are introverts. Or maybe partially introverts. There's something called introvert, there's extrovert, there's ambivert, which is that group in the middle. We're all in a continuum somewhere. So when we put our Talmidim together in groups, we're really tapping into the extrovert, because the extrovert, this is the idea. It's not that they're outgoing or not outgoing, it's where they draw their energy from. An extrovert goes into a simcha, goes into a room like this, and is excited and getting all charged up. Your batteries are getting charged by being around hundreds of peers around this room that are just inspiring all of you. And then you have someone like me who's an introvert. It doesn't mean you can't give a workshop. Doesn't even mean you can't be funny from time to time, right? But it means that when I'm done, I'm drained. And is there a Rebbe here in the room that feels similarly? When your day is done, you're not just because you put in energy, you put in effort. That's one thing, but you're drained. You ever have that? Okay, you might be an introvert. And the introverts do best when they have a chance to think about a question by themselves for a period of time. So we didn't really do it before, but I'm going to go back there for just a second so you see it here. The title. Take a look at this title for just a second. Think, pair, share. This is one of the most powerful and easy techniques you could use. Think about a question. Whatever question you want the Talmidim to think about. Think about it by yourself. Pair means you turn to the person next to you and you discuss what you came up with. Share means you share it with the class at large. So think by yourself, pair with the person next to you, share it with the group at large, or share with the class. So any question you might ask about Moshe Rabbeinu, about what do you think the Svar of the Tanna Kamma is, whatever. Think about it by yourself, 60 seconds. By the way, this is always the hardest part, because the extroverts want to start pairing right away. So you got to keep everybody quiet. You're helping your introverted students tremendously by giving them a chance to think on their own. Take the question inside, internalize the issue, and then discuss it. You're going to get a much better answer. As you will, anytime you ask a question, does anyone happen to know, I'm sort of peppering you with just ideas, but this is a good one also. Does anyone know what research says, how many seconds you need to wait between the end of a question you ask in your shiur and before you start taking your answers? How many seconds? Please show me with your fingers. How many seconds should you wait between the end of your question before you accept any Talmidim's responses? Okay, the correct answer is within the range of what I saw. It's not quite 10, but it's 7 seconds, which will feel like an eternity for many of us. 7 seconds feels like, oh my goodness, that's a long time to have silence in the room. But what you're doing when you have 7 seconds is you're giving Talmidim who have a harder time with retrieval, right? What you're asking them to do is retrieve information, go into their brain, draw it out. A lot of my work in coaching brings me, in greater New York area and beyond. I cannot tell you how many times, even yesterday I was thinking about this, a certain exit of a highway will remind me to call somebody back. You ever have that experience? You're driving, you get off the highway, oh, I need to call so-and-so. Why? How does it come to that? Because the last time I was talking to that guy, I was getting off this exit of the highway, right? Or something like that. Or maybe there's a song playing in your car, and then you hear the song again and it triggers a memory. Has that ever happened to you? Okay, so embedding information, that's the thing I wanted to mention before that I didn't. It's called episodic memory. Episodic memory is the most powerful form of memory that exists. It means memory embedded in an episode. Everybody here, I'm sure, remembers where you were when you heard about the events of 9/11. Where you were, you could probably give me some vivid detail about what happened that morning when you first heard about it. You might not remember what tie you were wearing, but you probably remember where you were, who you first saw, how you learned the information, what your reaction might have been, how you responded first, etc., etc. People from the previous generation will remember Kennedy's assassination. Or they'll remember the first hearing about the raid on Entebbe, or whatever. Big episodes. And by the way, they're personal episodes too. Personal episodes, whether it's a simcha, or an injury, or whatever. Episodes are great. That's why we, whenever we can, we want to create an environment where the learning is embedded in an episode. I don't know if you realize this. You are, believe it or not, you are a retrieval queue. Does anyone even know what that means? You are a retrieval queue. Yes? You know what it means?
I hope I'll tell my man, in 5th grade we learned this.
Okay. But it's even more than that. You personally are a retrieval queue. What do I mean by that? Have you ever had the experience where you're giving a test and your Talmidim are looking at their paper and they're writing it down? Then they look up, they look at you, or they look up above you, and then they look right back down and they continue their test. You ever see that before? Has that ever happened? Do you know what they're doing? They're using you, or the wall behind you, or the clock, to remind them of the information. That is the cue that their brain is using to retrieve the information. Because we learn in context. We don't learn in a vacuum. So when you create environments that are engaging, and there's episodes, and there's memory cues, and there's all sorts of things like that, that will trigger information. Give them every opportunity to succeed. Give them every tool to remember, right? And that's why, by the way, that last point on retrieval cue, you should never, I made this mistake many times, never have another person be a substitute when you're giving a test. Sometimes we think we have to miss a day, I'll give a test that day. So we have somebody else do it, a proctor. You are the retrieval cue. When you're not there, you're depriving. That's why you should also never test in a different room. Sometimes they do that, like a whole grade test, and they test in a different room. The learning should be in the place where it occurs as much as possible. There was actually a woman, believe it or not, when I was in Chicago. So she came from Peoria, which is in the state. And she was the memory expert. She said, I do not recommend that you do this, but I think our clothing probably sort of qualifies for this anyway. She did not change her outfit for the entire unit. She wore the same outfit so that she could be the ultimate retrieval cue for her students. So we're wearing dark suits and white shirts and dark ties anyway. So for the most part, it doesn't really matter that we change the specifics. But the idea is whatever we can do to make retrieval possible, to make memory a reality, it's going to help our Talmidim. So I'm going to, at this point, give the floor back to Rabbi Ryback. Rabosai, it's been a pleasure being with all of you this evening. I hope that this was helpful.